Let's do that.
So we'll call the meeting to order. Any changes to the agenda? Looks like nobody's here for
No.
public comment. Sorry. Should give me a chance to answer. Assuming no changes to the agenda and no public comments, is there a motion on the minutes from November 21st?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
any additions, changes?
No.
No, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Oh, and just also thanks for changing the meeting schedule on short notice. I have something that I thought was going to be scheduled for next Thursday that is scheduled for next Thursday, so I wouldn't have been able to be here. Hoping to be here for this discussion.
Well, and nobody's on Zoom. I mean, we have pretty good attendance too, so.
Yep.
It's great.
So I'll turn it over to you guys for staff.
Great. So I wanted to bring us through a couple of things. Starting with the Waitsfield Community Wastewater Project, under engineering, design and permitting. The topographic surveying is in its final stages. It's probably actually completed by this point. It was being finished beginning of this week. And mapping of wetlands, rare plants and cultural resources. Fieldwork has concluded. And the pump station, the test for the MUN site should be completed by now as well. That's happening either yesterday or today or tomorrow. So the results of all that work will feed into the final design process and provide a lot of guidance. So a lot of the work is happening right now on the different design elements, things like pump station sizing, working with property owners that would host pump stations, so on and so forth. So things are humming along. On the funding side of that project, one of the primary sources of funding is USDA Rural Development. We originally, the project implemented an application in April of 2024, but was informed that they needed this additional environmental assessment work to be a part of it, and actually didn't find out until August, September that was required. So that was submitted on November 15th. There's a little bit of back and forth, and it was actually finalized the beginning of this week. And there's a notice in today's paper, which is a requirement of the funding, a notice of the EA submission, and you can contact a guy by the name of Alex, who works for USDA, if you have more questions, or you can ask me. But per the announcement, so that'll run in the next couple editions of the paper. And that was the last thing that needed to be done for that project application. So we'd anticipate a response from USDA Rural Development and potentially an offer for funding in January, which is great.
What do you mean by an offer?
The way USDA Rural Development provides these sort of, it's a funding package, essentially,
Okay.
which is a mixture of grant and loan.
Okay. So you don't ask for a specific number, they throw a number at you and.
Yeah, so we sent them back for the April application, all sorts of a tremendous amount of information, and said, this is what we're looking at doing, and this is what we see as our funding, and it goes through their underwriting, and they are the ones who, yeah.
How much haggling can you do?
With the underwriters, zero. But after my conversation with the USDA Rural Development folks, once you have the initial offer and your project's moving forward, if you need additional funding, that's when that happens. So essentially, accept what they offer at you at first, work through the project, and as there's additional needs, there are opportunities for additional funding.
Rural development over the years has been really clear that a lot of Vermont towns, or Vermont leaves a lot of money on the table. So just.
Yeah, there has been opportunity for funding. It's, as I said, we applied in April and now it's December. There's a reason why there's money been left on the table, because it's challenging to access. But I feel really good about where we are, and I've been playing a pretty strong role in guiding the process. So I feel good about it. Another funding source for that project is the Vermont Community Development Program, which is HUD money. And I had a meeting with them initially in October and then a follow-up meeting in November, and looking sort of positioning the project to apply for a pre-application for that program in January, sort of in the $500,000 to $1 million range for that funding in each of their rounds. And then the really exciting news of the project is the Waitsfield Community Wastewater Projects application to the Central Vermont Economic Development Corporations and Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission's regional project priority list. So CVEDC and CVRPC are receive projects, each region does, to be on a list of projects of regional significance or regional project priorities. And our project, we applied last year for the Waitsfield Wastewater Community project that was not funded or not identified or selected. And this year we were selected, and we were selected as the number 2. The project was selected as the number 2 project in the region. The number 1 project is a new secondary institution focusing on engineering in Montpelier, at Montpelier College. I can't remember the name of it right now, Evergreen or a name similar to that. But the Waitsfield project was identified as number 2. So why do you want to be on that list? Mostly exposure. It speaks to the importance of a project when state and federal folks are looking at funding. It means a lot to be on that list. So it doesn't come with specific funding, but it provides access to funding and recognition for the project. So, and the great thing is that the college that was ranked number 1 isn't looking for funding. They're just looking for recognition. We're looking for funding, and we're number 2. So we're the number one looking for funding. So I anticipate, there was an article or a little piece in WCAX this week about that college, and the reason why they did that piece was because of this ranking. And so I anticipate opportunities for delegations and other folks coming to Waitsfield to learn about the project. So that one of our objectives in the month of January is updating our communications work on the project. We have a really great foundation of communications and explanation of the project, but it's mostly, it was built for specifically the local audience for the bond vote. And so we're going to be tweaking that for this sort of broader audience. So anyway, a lot happening specifically in the month of January from a VCDP application. I anticipate the USDA rural development work in the project priority list stuff and some other grant funds, grant opportunities I'm seeing on the horizon. Next thing I wanted to mention, speaking of Montpelier and the college area, the Winooski Flood Resilience Roundtable that happened up there on the 4th of December. I participated. It was a watershed-wide discussion. About 80 to 90 folks were there. Paul Costello was the moderator. It was a really great conversation in a broad with a broad constituents, really focusing on municipal folks. Explaining and exploring sort of challenges and opportunities related to resilience. It was a really positive event, and a lot of interest in collaborating across borders and trying to do this work collectively. So where it goes, we'll see, but that was sort of a kickoff event. A handful of things happening on the transportation front. The Vermont 100 Active Transportation Corridor Scoping Study. The local concerns meeting happened in the middle of November, and moving forward with sort of the next steps of that project. The Sugarbush Access Road Shared Use Path, Segment 1. Do you want to explain where it is in Segment 1?
Yeah, so Segment 1, we had our conceptual plan review the day after the local concerns meeting for the Vermont 100 Active Transportation Corridor meeting. We had a couple members of the public there to discuss the plans, and shortly thereafter, the conceptual plans were submitted to VTrans for essentially a preliminary review by VTrans, and their deadline to have feedback and comments on the conceptual plans is December 31st, at which point I imagine we'll take their feedback and incorporate it and modify the conceptual plans. And then kind of the long-term view of that project is, so right now, construction is scheduled for 2027, which is a longer process than we anticipated, but it's because there's certain steps that need to happen in order. They can't be happening concurrently, and that's the NEPA review and the right-of-way acquisitions, which could both take anywhere between 6 months on the short term to a year on the longer term. But we received the green light from the town of Warren to proceed with the funding application for Vermont, our Transportation Alternatives Grant Program. So hopefully, by getting that grant in for segment 2 funding, which is up to $600,000 per project, we can get some of these segments going on at the same time to realize some hopefully cost and time savings by getting them going and concurrently. So that's kind of where we're at with that. I've been drafting the narrative for the grant starting this Monday, and also did the mapping for that application. So we're trying to get it to a pretty good spot by the end of the day tomorrow, just so we're not having to hustle around Christmas time. So it's coming along nicely for segment 2.
In December 31st, right?
That's the deadline, yeah.
Then like New Year's Eve to have a grant deadline.
Exactly.
Can't imagine anyone's gonna look at them on the 1st, but anyway, I want to highlight the 2025 Downtown Transportation Fund Grant Program, February 17th, the deadline. This is for supporting safe multimodal transportation opportunities within village centers and downtowns. $200,000 or so is the maximum availability of grants at the 20% match. Warren and Waitsfield had previously been recipients of that grant program in 2022. After the last meeting, Dan reached out to me about the possibility of being involved in a discussion with the planning commission about the town garage site. And I've done we tried coordinating, and we haven't quite nailed down the meeting that I'll be attending, but I've done since last week a fair amount of research and reached out to a handful of folks. And so I'm mostly looking forward to listening, but I'm not going to come in telling. But I'm doing my research and identifying a variety of opportunities and considerations, and reaching out to folks who know of communities that have done similar projects, and specifically learning from their processes, and mostly just coming in from a place of like, what's a process that could work really well.
Justin, is that conversation gonna be specific to that project? Because we had talked at the executive committee about kind of dusting off the old housing study and
Yeah.
looking at the broad range of issues, and maybe letting the other planning commissions know that conversation's going on.
That's a great point. Thank you for the reminder.
I mean, I'm not saying that if you have something that's more urgent and more real,
Yeah.
definitely go for it.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm at the stage of, I'm really focusing on the Warren
Yeah.
opportunity. I mean, I looked at, I think there was ESA, environmental site assessment, phase 1 in 2008, to look at the ability to look at if there were any dangerous issues in 2008, specifically for the opportunity of housing. So it's a long time coming in Warren. So I'm primarily focusing there, but my plan is to put together a pretty good document that could be used more broadly, specifically on that sort of development opportunity. But thank you for the reminder of dusting off the housing stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
And to translate for Andy a little bit, so we know the garage has a long runway. I mean, we need a bond vote.
Yep.
And when you mentioned the bond vote website, there's probably some learning Warren could do from the communication strategy Waitsfield employed. But the vision of putting housing on the town garage site eventually is, has been since a 20-year-old town charrette.
Yeah.
As I'm sure Joshua knows, so.
the holy grail.
The holy grail. So the idea is, well, are there steps? I mean, it's kind of, it's. One, it's keep the idea that we'd like housing to go there, right? Keep that as an active concept, because one could think, oh, well, maybe we should sell the land and use those proceeds to help pay for the cost of the new garage, right? Well, ideally, at least from the planning commission's perspective, it would be, well, that's a great place for housing, right, in Warren Village. And we don't really know anything about, there's not a lot of understanding about what we should be doing in the meantime. So that's sort of why we're hoping to connect with Joshua and get some understanding and realizing that there's a long way to go on the garage, but let's try to move, keep moving forward on the housing idea.
So Dan, is the idea that the town will supply the land to a developer under the idea that the developer will build what we expect?
I think my idea was, I really know nothing about the development process and know very little about the grants that might be available. And the steps, like thinking longer term, if we wanted to get housing on there and access funding sources.
Correct.
What should we be doing? Are there designations we should be getting? Are there committees, is there a housing coalition or a housing coalition we should be forming? I mean, what should we be doing really to make the case, I think, to get state funding to help us get something done, or federal funding?
Yeah,
And we
because,
don't know much about that, and Joshua knows a lot about that.
yeah, and if you don't mind me jumping in, I mean,
Please.
right, so far I've chatted with folks at, Vermont Council on Rural Development, Vermont Housing Conservation Board, and Agency of Commerce Community Development, mostly just saying, hey, where are there examples of things that have worked? What are examples where they haven't? And what are the types of considerations that are out there? And really, I mean, I'm interested in coming and listening to the planning commission. But I think the first question is, what do we want? Well, what are we interested in? And then identifying what is a process that allows the community to get there. There was an exploration, Waitsfield, in the last year received a neighborhood development area designation, which has made possible funding for the wastewater project. I talked to the planning commission, I want to say 14 years ago, about having a neighborhood development area designation for Warren, specifically for which can aid in housing. It caps water and wastewater fees and a variety of other things. And it's those, but that designation program is shifting and changing. So I contacted the guy at the state being like, hey, can you help me understand how, what are the opportunities? And it's that kind of thing, like what are the structural things? And what are the process opportunities? My biggest thing I would say is, I think you're far away from having a conversation of exactly who does what and how it happens, because, if you work with a housing developer of one type or another, you might end up in one direction or another, and that'll have implications on funding. So like Downstreet as a partner, but I wouldn't suggest talking to Downstreet soon. I would sort of wait on that and really understand what the interests are. Is it a moment?
So I will say that we had what I consider is actually a very good housing development of Wheeler Brook, that no one was really happy with the way it turned out, and who was allowed to be there, and the financials of it. So I think that there's more options than just one of the big 3 or 4 nonprofits in central Vermont that do this kind of work.
1,000%.
And I think that some sort of public-private partnership is probably the way to go, with the town giving the land, the sewer, and the water. And, having certain stipulations on what's expected to be built there. I think that is a very difficult site, actually. It's flat with a huge hill of sand behind it and the parking lot above. I think that to build on it, you're gonna have to stabilize that entire hillside, and that can be very expensive. And I will tell you a secret. There's a better piece of land directly across the street for a smaller project. Anyway, it's town land, and I don't know why it's never been really discussed, but it's right there. And the sewer is just down on Brook Road. So the sewer coming up solves multiple problems, for siting place. Anyway, happy to show you sometime.
Yeah, and I think that'll be, I mean, I don't think that. I think like, for example, you should pursue a neighborhood designation. If the garage site's not the right site and the site across the street is, well, I mean, I think the same learning, I'm
Right,
assuming the
right.
same learning as to what steps we should follow to try to do something.
And then the other thing is what's the future? Who owns, are we building something for someone for ownership? Or are we building it for, some entity to run as a low income housing that's rented? So what works best for Warren and what do you, I don't know, you guys may have discussed it or that may be
You know,
another
we're
topic
really-
of discussion.
No, I mean, I think we're really. It's really that the fact that the garage is finally moving was like an opportunity, we thought. And I know the MRVPD is very excited about it too, to finally try to move the ball forward in Warren Village. And so we don't have any preconceptions, we don't have any. We don't have enough knowledge to move the ball forward, so that we're trying to gain that knowledge, that's the idea.
We're just speaking at the 100,000 foot level. I think it's very exemplary to move this process forward now as opposed to wait until the whole garage thing is done. Because we all know, as we talked about in the past, and so on, the sequential processes are such, the sooner you start, the sooner you can get something that you can make decisions on. So I think it's great that you're doing that, Bob.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you for, well, which is to say, we may not have that much to say.
Yeah.
Other than we have ideas, we'd like to do
Cool.
something, but we really,
I'm looking forward to it, and I mean, when we finished the housing study a couple of years ago, I was like, what we need is a project. We did a project, a community project, and like sort of waiting for that to happen. So this is a potential opportunity, and I think it's a great conversation, and we've got a pretty good base to work off of, and there's a lot of resources out there, so I'm looking forward to it.
so do you think it would be worthwhile for other, I mean, I guess if you're a planning commissioner. And, you know, I don't know if Jonathan's on, but like, you're welcome,
Yeah.
you're welcome to attend, hopefully it's of interest and.
Totally.
I think there should be some learning shared that we would be happy to hear from. Folks in Waitsfield or Facein who have ideas to share or questions to ask.
Yeah, I didn't mean to
Mostly
change the
learning.
agenda, but I thought it was a really cool idea. If where there's opportunities to share information, where there's a topic that might be of interest to all the towns. And some of they're talking broadly about strategies, just the practice of letting other folks zoom in and.
I think it's a great idea,
Yeah,
why not?
It's awesome.
I mean, people just
There's
don't have
something
enough meetings to
similar
go
going
to.
on, isn't Waitsfield kind of in the midst of some public-private partnership with the Valley Mead folks, and there's a parcel that they want to develop down by Tremblay Road.
Yeah,
all
the
that
Shea
might-
Brothers who
Yeah,
own
yeah.
the,
Right.
owned the old Gallagher's and the Methodist Church and did a small subdivision. They bought the old
Yeah,
Spalding
and
farm.
and the weed farm.
They-
at the
they
bottom
came-
surface.
They came to the select board and just pitched, give us this land and we'll develop housing. And
Right,
that was extremely preliminary. We're not,
right.
anywhere
But
near
I
that
mean, you
conversation.
know,
But it is relevant.
it's
It's the same kind of thing.
in the
It could be
same
a-
bucket,
a
yeah.
public-private partnership of
Yeah.
some sort involving town property.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we still haven't figured out the future of the fairgrounds. And whether that has a role in future wastewater disposal or in some other form of development, that's
Okay, new guy here, where's the fairgrounds?
behind the Catholic Church. It's
I know where
actually,
Catholic
it's,
Church is. Haven't
it's,
been in there, but I know where it is.
it's an amazing piece of property. It's
It's a
16
great
acres.
place to go to for a walk.
Yeah.
It's you'll think you're in a different world.
For real,
You'll be like, this is like 100 yards off of Route 100 and I know nothing about it.
behind are
It's
the,
a 16-acre field.
Yeah.
It's
A
a big
flat
field,
field.
big flat field
I
up
wouldn't
there.
even know it's there.
In the 1940s or 50s, it was a fairgrounds.
Yeah,
for
there are
Central
pictures of
Vermont.
of fairs that are conservation
Oh,
commission.
right.
You wouldn't know it was there unless you go to it.
And it goes up to, it goes up to Woo Ledges. It abuts
Yeah, I was gonna
Town
say, it's up by
Forest.
Wool.
It's
quite a hike from Blue Edges, but there is a trail, or at least there used to be a trail.
It's actually, it's a real nice hike, although it's not a very well-defined trail.
Right, all right.
Yeah.
I don't have to walk through the Catholic church to get there.
Well, if you go to the back of the parking lot, there's like a slope that goes right up to it.
Yeah.
Am I correct about?
Yes, yeah, it's like a farm road.
We don't need to get into your past.
This is a safe space.
Yeah.
I got
But you do have to
married
pass through the
in a Catholic
narthex,
church,
for
was the
sure.
last time I've been in.
Just say 3 Hail Marys and do 2 rosaries and whatever else they do. You're all set.
One don't sleep.
So I'll keep rolling. I only have a few more,
Yeah.
a couple things. One, the Irisville Village Master Planning project. So what was it, the 18th, the 15th or 18th of November? The Monday, the week before Thanksgiving was a really great public event. And for that project, there's a website that's linked in here on the master planning effort. If you weren't able to attend and are interested in what was discussed and potentially interested in sharing your thoughts and opinions, there's a way to participate. There's a summary of that event. On the page, there is a form that you can fill things in and pictures of every single one of the dot voting panels used at that event. So take a look at it. Just announced last week, I think it was, the municipal planning grant program for this upcoming year. March 31st is the deadline, so up to $30,000 for individual municipalities, $45,000 for consortium applications. That's what a consortium application is, what's funding the Irisville project that I just mentioned. But the next round of funding has been identified. And I think that was all I was going to mention. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, anything else stand out to anybody on the written report?
I'm gonna ask one more time before I want, so I mean, I guess I could do it. I need a whole acronym, sort of index, sort of, you know what I'm saying? I have got complete acronym overload. I don't know how to keep track of all this stuff.
I will try to do a better job of
No.
spelling them out, but I literally
You
wrote down.
spell them out. I could go through them and then I could just make my own little cheat sheet, but man.
I actually wrote down VCRD, VHCB, and ACCD, so I wouldn't say it that way. And I actually can't even remember if I actually said them out loud or just gave you the acronyms, but I mean, truly, I mean, there are a lot of acronyms. And second, all those acronyms can make you feel excluded. And part of the idea is to ensure that people are included in this work.
Yeah, I mean, you could have.
But it is
done
short.
the entire presentation and it would have just gone. Just right.
That's the problem of eating it and breathing it for so
Yeah.
long.
Well, thank you for
You're welcome.
breaking it into Zoom.
So let's move into new business, the NYVPD, that stands for Mad River Valley Planning District. Draft work plan, which we did not, I've been thinking back to the executive committee meeting where we looked at a draft, but we did not look at it in November, so we
Correct.
have not presented a draft to the steering committee yet.
Correct, and I'm realizing I should put it on the screen anyway, just for a minute taker, and if anybody else is interested in what we're talking about, I'll share the screen.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, the steering committee is typically, I've only been through one budget and work plan cycle as a member of the steering committee, but have typically this time of year looked at them in conjunction because they're related to see what we're investing in and
Correct.
where we're going to be putting our resources this year.
Exactly, and yeah, and I think it's good to start with the work plan, because let's start talking about the work before we start talking about what we're spending money on. Before we talk about the money side, so I think that's the right order. So I want to sort of start with first off, with this FY fiscal year 26. What is our fiscal year? Our fiscal year starts on March 1st and it ends at the end of February this year. That's on the 28th this year, February. So that's our fiscal year. at our September 19th steering committee meeting, which was the halfway point essentially of our fiscal year, I presented an update in the broader context for the planning district's work. We talked about the planning district's purpose, the vision statement, the domains, the guiding approaches, and grants. And we also talked about where we were in the work plan that had been that we were again halfway through in the year. So I just want to so we did a kind of a deep dive not that long ago, but I want to highlight a handful of things before we talk about where we're going. So this is the existing this is the resultant work plan of the effort last year approved by the select board in January of 2024. And it sought to balance a broad lens as well as a focus on specific projects. The planning district has this, our charge as an organization. And if anyone wants to go into those things like our values and domains, I absolutely will, but I was planning on just sort of staying focused on the actual work plan. But our focus is really broad. And the tendency when it's when the charge is broad is that the work is also broad. And in my tenure, I found trying to strike that balance of focusing on a project as well as getting spread too thin and doing too many things at once. And so, right, a little bit of housing and a little bit of rural resources, a little bit of infrastructure, a little bit of economic development. Generally we kind of have a primary thrust and sort of like 2-3 primary things, and then involvement or support in some other things. And 2 years ago, in fiscal year 24, in fiscal year 24, that was a time where we were down a staff member at the beginning of that year. That's the year that Sam came on board. But we made a decision to really hammer and focus on one thing, and that was the Waitsfield Community Wastewater Project. And I think it worked. It was a good use of staff time. That project, it was a key involvement and a key piece of time. Last year, so that was essentially 90% of my work in that year. That and Sam coming on board and so on and so forth. Last year, or in fiscal year 25, the year that we're in right now, the Waitsfield Community Wastewater Project is essentially 50% of my time. So it's not as much as it was before, but there's a fair amount of involvement. It is the primary thing that I'm focused on. We also have our data work that Sam is primarily responsible for, the data report, the community well-being survey, the community dashboard, and the housing. So again, these are things that we had put on our work plan. Actually, I'm going to pop to the next page, because when we talked about this last September, I identified this is where we are. The green things are the areas that we've been deeply engaged in, and the things that are not highlighted were the things that we weren't deeply engaged in, but we're ready. Well, but we're at the ready if and when they are ready to be for our involvement. So this is where we were in September, and honestly, all those things have stayed the course. There hasn't been a big change in any of that. And then we had some additional items off to the right related to the July 10th flood and support, which started with sort of damage assessment and mapping in Fayston, and recovery coordination, some dialogue on emergency response, and interest in a collaboration with Friends of Mad River on response, rebuild, and resilience, and talking about an event series. So that's kind of I just want to remind people where we were at that particular time. So what do I see for the new year? Well, you might look at that and be like, well, that looks exactly the same. I don't know. I can go back and forth until somebody can figure out what are the two things that are missing. But I'll make it easy on you.
Something's gone from data.
Yeah.
Yes, very good. Community Wellbeing Survey and the Historical Photo Project related to the Rural Resource Commission. So the reality is most of the work doesn't fit cleanly within a particular fiscal year. Projects have a long lifespan. And the Waitsfield Community Wastewater project and the role that I've been playing as doing project coordination. The project, as I shared before, is in final design and is poised to have bid documents this summer, or fall with the hope of construction in 2026. And finish going through the permitting and other pieces of that work. And so in the new fiscal year, the things that I see specific to that project, in addition to continuing the coordination and final design work and serving on the engineering and technical team. But that grant funding, as I shared before, building off that momentum, the USDA Rural Development, Vermont Community Development Program, Northern Border Regional Commission, and all the opportunities related to the regional project priority listing, as well as communication and outreach, working with regulators, so on and so forth. I see in many ways that project heating up in those particular ways in the new year. And there was again a commitment for a tremendous amount of Plain District time, 2 fiscal years or last fiscal year, and continuing that effort for a project that has impact across the entire valley. The second on the data side, we do an annual data report. So that work happens every single year. And then the dashboard, the community dashboard, is part of the output of that effort. The community well-being survey, which Sam administered this year, will be we move to an every other year timeframe, and so we get to set that aside. But Sam was a lot quicker in doing the data report this year than you were last year, as far as like putting all the pieces together and really building a efficiency in that effort. The next is Warren's short-term rental data project. So it is our understanding that Warren's intending to have an ordinance on short-term rentals. Inching closer. So the Warren PC was really been implementing this project, leading it initially, and it's with the select board now. Building off the Plain District's previous work on identifying a strategy around short-term rentals. We undertook a 2022 community survey on short-term rentals, and it's really great to see where Warren is, and anticipating that the ordinance will move forward, and then we'll be working with a short-term rental company, Granicus, and we specifically Sam will be providing support on the data side of that, and collecting and analyzing the data. So we were prepared for that this year, but we're going to be prepared for that for next year. And continuing the Irisville Village Master Plan project that I gave a little bit of update on before. The shared use paths, the sort of transportation things, the first 2. So as Sam mentioned, the Sugarbush Access Road shared use path, I think it was 2016 was the scoping study for that project. And segment 1 has received funding, and that's the one that's where the project plans are being reviewed, and we'll be going through those processes that Sam mentioned, as well as applying for the next segment of that project. So the segment 1 goes from the Four Corners and Warren to Airport Road, and then segment 2 is identified to going from Airport Road. Golf Course Road. Thank you. From Golf Course Road to the Sugarbush Inn, German Flats Road. So assuming that gets the existing phase, moving that forward, and then second, anticipating that there'll be the next phase or segment of the project. The Vermont 100 Active Transportation Corridor study, which is underway right now with an intention in the either late summer or winter of next year to apply for funding for either additional analysis or implementation of a segment of that project. So that's sort of what the work is related to that. Continuing the support of the MAD bus, which, oh man, I left the bus mapping guides on my desk. But the bus starts on the 20th of December, the MAD bus, but supporting the operation of that work. And also being at the ready for the Vermont 117 intersection project with the town of Waitsfield and V-Trans. It is on the list. It was scheduled for some work to happen in December, the end of 2024, but that apparently is being pushed back. So
Just an aside, any changes anticipated in the MAPA schedule for this year compared to last year?
There was a small change in, I can get back to the specifics. Basically, it was a late night service on the weekend. There was a very low ridership. Can't remember the exact time slots to the valley floor. And it was a reduction of maybe 20 to 30 hours per season. So that was one alteration. But I can send you the specifics later on. But by and large, it was more or less the same.
Okay. The reason for stimulating the question was the GMT have just announced cutbacks across the whole
Right.
state and the whole operating areas, whether it's going to impact us.
yeah, so we're not aware of that type of
Yeah.
impact with the
Okay.
MAPUS, which is great.
And maybe I'm off the back here as well, but what's, what is proposed for the Vermont 117 intersection?
We have zero idea.
No,
Nothing.
not off the back.
Yeah, so nothing is proposed. I mean, there was a 20-year process. They came up with a design a long time ago that then got shelved.
I think it came up with 16 designs. So
Correct.
There's a lot of disagreement among bodies in Waitsfield over what the best
And
direction
the
was.
crazy and faced it.
Of Facein, yes, that's
And,
right.
and not only were there 60 designs, but I remember seeing 16 different options in like the 17th year of that project, which absolutely blows my mind. But,
So when V-Trans we came with an offer to help, they made us sign a commitment to get along.
Where's the town line?
Just over the bridge. Right, yeah, the bridge is in Waitsfield.
Just a little ways, yeah.
yeah, just on the other side of the bridge.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the reason, just a little bit of quick history. My understanding is that the intersection work that was done before was, it started because of looking at the bridge and that the bridge over the Millbrook was both functionally deficient and geometrically deficient. And they were looking at that, and the approach to that bridge isn't Facein. And when they were looking at the bridge, they were like, well, there's this intersection too, which is also tricky, and it got larger. And so it was a complicated project. There was a lot of disagreement. I actually found the motion at town meeting day, I want to say 2005, 2003, where the voters voted to Waitsfield to officially disengage from V-Trans and stop working on the project because of all of that disagreement. I've never seen that before. And so the fact that V-Trans is willing to come back is great. They have these types of stipulations, as Brian said, and but my understanding is that there's a fair amount of backlog, but it was in their budget this past year, which I anticipate will roll over into the next year. I have a reminder every single month to send a reminder to V-Trans and CVRPC asking them the status of that project, and I will continue to be the squeaky wheel. So rural resources, the Banner Valley Rural Resource Commission, the planning district in 2022 focused on reconstituting the Banner Valley Rural Resource Commission, fulfilling a commitment that the planning district made back in 1987 to have an active CLG, community local government entity. I'm trying. There's a lot of them.
Paul's glazing over. He's glazing over.
Certified.
Certified, sorry, what did I say?
Community.
Yes, thank you, Brian. Certified local government. See, I'm even,
If we're using, yeah.
yeah.
Acronym change.
And in 2022 and 2023 was the Boys Hill Education Project in Facein, which was led by the Rural Resource Commission, and the Historical Photo Project was the project that's happened in this particular fiscal year. There is not a particular project on the docket for that group, and right now it's kind of in a quiet stage, but what a sort of holding space for the Rural Resource Commission there. Well, speaking of holding space, provide project review and guidance on Sugarbush projects and MOU revisions is sort of something that two items that we've sort of held and not aware of any particular projects that require review and guidance, and no proposals on the MOU revisions that I'm aware of, but holding space for those things. And then municipal support, everything from attending meetings, in support of zoning administrators and having, gatherings of them across the valley. Tri-Town leadership meeting, which we lasted in 2023, and, communication and outreach activities.
One
So-
question, George, if I
Yep.
may. As I've been away from this table for a bit, has there been any change in the MOU since I was last year?
No.
Okay, thank you.
And is there anything anticipated?
No.
Okay.
And we might meet, there was a request from Sugarbush to keep that on there
Okay.
previously, and that's what we did. And there was a discussion after the Tri-Town leadership meeting in 2013, which really kicked off the commitment to the wastewater project. But there was a discussion about the possibility of having some MOU changes. But there, nothing that I'm aware of came from that.
I mean, sorry to interrupt, but at one time there was, because a lot of the MOU is focused. Well, it's
Right.
almost exclusively focused on Sugarbush's, right?
Yeah.
It's what Sugarbush is gonna do, and it's been changed.
I
over
mean,
time, and the MR
that's what predicated it. yeah.
Right, and the MRVPD does a lot of other things now, I would say largely not focused on Sugarbush. So there's an argument for saying, well, what? But it's a big thing, and maybe, I'm not sure there's a lot of will to take on that big, to open that can of worms when there's so many other things going on.
But the roles and responsibilities, subcommittee of the planning district, which was formed and has been focusing on a variety of things. This was, I think that's an opening to have, some MOU changes.
Indeed.
So in addition to those things, so almost fully the same as the existing year. Opportunities, requests, items for this year that I'm aware of that have been brought to my attention or have had requests. So that Friends of Mad River collaboration, response, rebuild, and resilience efforts. And I should mention, each of these things are kind of more conceptual than they are anything specific. But these are sort of opportunities and requests. So one is working with Friends of Mad River, and engaging the community on events, exploring response, rebuild and resilience efforts, but second, working on some structural things with emergency management coordinators and things of that sort. We've had a handful of initial conversations, but that's as far as it's gone so far. The second, as we mentioned, the Warren PC conversation on the town garage site. Not sure where that conversation is going to go, but being open to that, and want to ensure that we have resources to be able to provide that support. The Community Recreation Visioning 2.0, so the VORIC grant, the Vermont Outdoor Recreation Economic Collaborative. If you remember back in the late summer, Laura Arneson and Phil Huffman did a presentation on the VORC project, and specifically a portion of that, which is the Community Recreation Visioning, also known as CRV. And that work in the VORC grant are going to be closed in March. And there's an initial conversation on 2.0 of that effort, not having that grant funding, but wanting to continue having dialogue and work related to recreation and conservation efforts in the valley. And so Laura reached out to me directly a month and a half ago, and requested planning district's involvement, as she did when she was here, but specifically related to this next version. There isn't clarity yet on what that work looks like. Is it, quarterly meetings of the partners and they're looking for facilitation support, or are they looking in involvement in a more substantial way? And that's yet to be seen.
What did I read in the Valley Report today about Warwick?
They got more funding. And
Okay,
I'm sorry, I hate to keep doing this.
it's great.
It's conservation recreation.
Golly, you were right, Brian.
Yeah.
See, this is why I stick with
That's
acronyms.
crazy.
CRV still, but.
It's still CRV.
It's,
No, I just read.
you can correct me at any point, all of you can.
I just read in the paper that they got some additional funding, including from Basin Conservation Commission, Warren ARPA money. and rec district.
Great, great.
I don't know what it's for.
Yeah, and I don't either, and so, but I do know that the existing group is having a conversation about a 2.0 and looking, and are interested in having the planning district's involvement. You know, if it was something like facilitation and that kind of work, that could be, we've talked internally that could be a role that Sam could play, but if you know, so that's kind of a wait and see. And then last is Tri-Town Leadership Meeting. So like I said, in January 2023, so a year, almost 2 years ago, was the last time that we had a gathering, and that was really specifically focused on sort of like, where's the planning district now? But this next year is our 40th anniversary, which Brian previously corrected me on a date. But I got it right this time, right? And maybe it's an opportunity to have a gathering that serves the community, but also potentially some either writings or other things in this year that highlight the sort of longevity of the work in the planning district has undertaken in service of its partner communities. So those are things for which I don't have a particular project or anything related to it. The next sort of piece, and we're nearly done, is sort of like, okay, so who does what? And I've kind of explained some of this so far. One of the things in this particular fiscal year that we're in now, and I foresee going forward, is in addition to the planning work, which is overwhelmingly what you see here, that Sam and I are engaged in, but working specifically in more of the administrative work and things related to financials and budgeting, for which I have been engaged in, and that's the next thing we're going to talk about. But wanting to ensure that will be a priority going forward. You know, left to my own devices, I usually will do more of the planning work than the finance work, because that's kind of how I'm hardwired. But I want to ensure, but I'm excited to do that work as well, and want to make sure that we're not overloading so that we're being pulled in too many directions. So that leads to essentially the list of things minus the two, with a couple items to explore. And I've got, I guess I only made 5 printed copies.
Can I add something to your list?
Yeah, please. Yes.
Not so much that it's gonna create a lot of work for the two of you, but we had talked about the MOU that we are gonna try to develop with the ambulance service.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it should stay on a project list, just to stay on our radar. I don't know yet what would be required of you two, other than us. We had talked about,
Didn't the ambulance prepare a draft?
they did prepare a draft.
Okay.
So I guess it would be up to us to take a look at that and determine how we want to do it as Valley Towns. But I'd just like to see it on the list so we don't lose sight of it. I don't think we have to do anything to completion probably before the end of the summer, when we get into budgeting season again, and they're gonna be asking us for money again, and we should have an MOU in place when that happens, so.
I thought it was a little more immediate, is it not?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Well, I think they're gonna be asking for money this year.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I guess that's gonna be separate from the MOU. I mean, that's the way our select board looked at it for budgeting. We're gonna,
because we talked about it 2 nights ago, and we didn't have we thought they were gonna come and present, and they didn't.
okay,
So we didn't take a vote on it, but we're pretty much ready to go on it. There's nothing to wait for that I'm aware of.
yeah, and if it happens sooner, the better, so,
So I was thinking it was an imminent MOU.
okay. I don't know, we had talked at one of our last meetings
Brian?
about,
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I thought so as well, and it was. I know that we've received it. I don't know that we've taken action on it.
With the draft look fairly ready to just be tweaked and.
well, I think an
Adopted.
attorney review would be appropriate as well before we move forward with it, so, you know, those kinds of things.
And all
But-
three, I'm assuming all 3 towns have to, right, it's a single MOU, so
That's
all 3
exact,
towns would have to agree.
and Moretown is
Yeah.
part of the deal as well, so we
They're a
have to.
half
Yeah.
partner or
Yeah,
whatever.
have to coordinate with them as well, so, but I think we have it on the list,
So what do you think the order of business is? It's have a town attorney look at, each town has a town attorney look at it, or do we all sign off on one town attorney, or how do we do
I
that?
think that would be ideal if we could do it through this organization, you know, have one attorney look at,
The planning district pays for it,
and then the town's reimbursed, I would think, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, no offense to the attorneys, but I'm just having 3 attorneys or 4 attorneys look at it.
Oh, that's like, divorce court.
That's not my kind of problem.
So I'll put the brakes on Warren for a little bit and tell him that this is not, needed for the immediate term, because we were gonna pass it the other night and sign it.
okay.
So, good that we did not, and we'll bring that back up.
I'm trying to remember if it was on our consent agenda. We may have signed off on it, but I will check on Monday.
Yeah, let's do that and communicate through Josh.
Sounds good.
Great. So it sort of leads to here, and really what I want to do is have a discussion, is like, you know, are there blind spots? Are we focusing on things that where focus should go elsewhere, so on and so forth? Many questions about these things. You know, this isn't as full, you know, I didn't come in with a fully baked thing. It was just sort of building off of the work we've been doing. And a continuation of that with some opportunities for some new things.
Is there work to be added in for, health center issues? Or do you have a lane there, or is that something that is not really, it may not be like our bailiwick at all, it's just something, it's done to us rather than we're part of having it done.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one. Yeah, there seems like they're similar to what you were just talking about there, but there's a timing piece here, right? So there's a timing piece related to the health center, but you know, there's some immediate things that are happening or could be happening right now, and then some longer term. I don't exactly know what that lane would be or the role, but you know, there does seem to be an opportunity or potentially a need to have some leadership and centrality around the discussion. I've been focusing on budgets for the last couple of weeks. So I haven't been in that brain space, but yeah, I mean, I think that's a great discussion for us to have.
I was gonna bring up in the roundtable that we probably should have that discussion. I think it's a very short-term issue. It's not really a budget for 2026 issue, I don't think.
Yeah.
At this point, at least, unless something dramatically happens.
Right.
Build something new.
Right.
yeah. Josh and I were talking about this. I received along with a couple other people, Marco being one, a letter from Sue Fischette. I don't know if you remember.
Yep.
That Sue had a background in nursing and medical consulting kind of thing, and so she offered to help whatever group or organization could use the help, just to kind of analyze what's going on. And Josh and I talked about that, and we, you know, there's nobody in the valley that has the focus right now to do that kind of work, to have somebody like Sue come in, analyze what's been going on, make some suggestions, even on questions to ask. She said, you know, she could be helpful in that, but there's nobody really in the valley that's spearheading that. And I don't know if we're the group to do that, or there's others that may be more appropriate, but, you know, so I haven't directed her anywhere, you know, not knowing who the best organization would be to do that.
Wouldn't you think it should be the health center board is kind of the spearhead, or no?
Well, so their responsibility is for the building and that's it, and the rentals. So they don't really have any say in the healthcare aspect of it, if that's the right way to put it.
But they did 10 years ago, right? Didn't they morph out of that?
No, so they, because I was on that board
Yeah.
a while back as
Yeah.
well, and no, we were always the landlord and
Okay.
and still are the landlord. Now, naturally, one of the missions of that building is to support healthcare in the valley. And so they're concerned from that perspective. They're also concerned about having empty space in the building that they would need to rent. But as far as a direct medical impact, they don't have any.
Were they,
I mean, they've been sending letters too, their voice
Yeah.
has been heard,
I
yeah,
read their
letter in the paper, and I thought it was well done.
Yeah,
Initially, that when they were formed to build a building, it was to recruit a doctor, correct?
Yeah.
That's what-
Correct.
Way back.
and Fran Cook, actually he had the little ranch house, right, and then he moved into that practice.
Yeah.
And then there was too much administrative work for him, I believe. And he was happy to have, when the hospital offered to come in and take over that space, that he transitioned into working for the hospital. And then he retired, and then we have all the other practitioners that are in there now. So, yeah, it's been a transition since 2007, 2008, I think the building opened.
Yeah,
So,
right around there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I don't know, I just put that out there, I don't know who the proper people are to spearhead, it does seem like it's gonna be a short-term thing, I don't know. If there's enough time to organize people to do the work that needs to be done, you know, in time for impacting a decision, I don't know how all that will work. But
Yeah.
anyway, Sue's available if anybody hears of anyone who's looking for additional information or support. She's volunteering, so.
Yeah, I mean, I would say from a staffing perspective and timing and resources, we're not in a position, like, we're not looking for something.
Yeah,
But I think it's a mixture of having resources, being well positioned and like community-wide, and being in a leadership role and being respected, whatever that organization or individual is. But there does seem to be a need.
mhm,
But it hasn't been identified yet.
yeah,
It's communications and coordination,
Right.
if I.
Yeah, I mean, because right now I think it's overwhelmingly confusion.
Yeah.
Right, confusion is the circumstance that we're all dealing with, like, what's going on and why, what's the motivation and
Mhm.
how is that happening and why did that happen and what can happen? I mean, those are that's how I would frame sort of where things are at. Yeah, it is a communications piece.
And do we have any levers to change anything, right?
Right.
At the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in communication with somebody at the hospital who's the communications director at the hospital about this, and he's very, he's happy to. Communications director, he's happy to talk about it, and be part of a conversation here if that's necessary.
So if we want to continue this conversation, this topic, I think it is going to need some fairly heavy hitting in a very short time frame to make something actually happen. I mean,
Right.
as written up in the paper last week, when the landlords discussed with the hospital, they said, we made a decision. There's nothing to talk about. We're not going to tell you any numbers. Thanks for coming. Bye. I mean, that was basically the essence of the article, right? And on the other hand, the hospital is saying, with the Green Mountain Care Board decisions on our budget, we can't do anything. So it seems to me this is going to have to get resolved at the political level. I mean, the Green Mountain Care Board is appointed by the governor, right? They've got a term which goes on for infinity or something, another 4 or 5 years. But presumably this political pressure can be brought to bear. But it seems to me that the only way we make a difference is if we do get some kind of, I don't know, task force or something that represents the community, all elements of it, and basically brings in some political support to start bashing heads together. Because I don't think anything's going to change otherwise. The note I sent around the other day, conversation with my doctor, suggests things are going to happen very quickly. Like staff are being given deadlines to decide where they're going to go. And once they've gone, they're not going to come back.
Right.
So I think we need to get on top of this before Christmas. So, I mean, the opportunity of having someone that knows what we're talking about is a good idea, but I think we need to form some kind of group. And I don't think it should fall on Josh and Sam. I think it needs to be somewhere else, but it does need to represent the community. So I don't know beyond that what the answer is, but I think it has to be done quickly, and it has to be a body that clearly represents the community, you know, the valley and the building, because it's got a vested interest in success here. But it's probably the number one issue in the community at the moment. It's why is this happening? How do we fix it?
When you say it's a political issue, you know, obviously the legislature is not in session now. It's about to be,
Right.
you know, January 5th, it will be in
But
session.
the administration seems to be in charge of the Green Mountain Care Board rather than the legislature, as I understand it.
Yes, Phil Scott appoints the Green Mountain Care Board. The Green Mountain Care Board has said to UVM, you've got to cut costs.
Right.
They did not say you've got to cut you've got to take away the health center.
That's right.
But, you know, they said you've got to cut costs.
Actually, they said you have to cut revenue.
And-
Yeah, that's
So
what-
revenue-
That's right. It doesn't make any sense to me.
And
Yeah.
cost.
Yeah.
probably.
Right,
Yeah.
that's the
Um,
head scratcher.
But in any
But-
event, it seemed to me the one intervention that hasn't happened so far is with the administration. And just to find out if there are any levers there, I don't know if there are, but.
Well, I think that's where I mean, I mean, this is like, I could see the MRVPD.
Yes,
You convinced me last meeting, the MRVPD has a role. I could see the chamber having a role. I could see the board of the health center having a role.
yeah,
I mean, it's kind of it falls in the middle of all these community organizations. But I wonder if trying to get our legislators, maybe they're doing something. I don't know what they're not in session, but that, I mean, if you wanna,
the Christmas shop.
I don't know, maybe has someone, I mean, I think people have reached out to them, but
Well, I mean,
I
as
don't know
Brian
if
said,
that's
it's a
strategy.
communications thing, right? It's a
Yeah.
communications and coordination
Yes. exactly.
situation.
I mean, I think everyone involved has received multiple letters and emails on the topic, but coordinated focus, I don't think exists at the moment.
I'm wondering, maybe a group of community leaders should reach out and try to meet with the governor. And, you know, Washington County senators are gonna be chairs of 2 money committees in the Senate. And I imagine they might have some sway.
I mean, they're,
I mean,
don't,
those are our
don't,
local-
don't do dagger eyes at me, but there's a lot of leaders around this table. But yeah, I mean, I think it takes a certain amount of leadership and bandwidth to be able to do this right now. I agree with your assessment.
I mean, certainly one of the things, we have we listed 2 of our senators are fairly long-term, they know the ropes, Ann Cummings in particular. I don't know if anyone's reached out to her directly.
That's a great question.
Well, I think we dropped the ball on, the letter. I don't know.
Still got to be signed by.
Printed,
Wakefield
it still hasn't been
Department.
signed by everybody. I'm gonna put it on the agenda on Monday.
I got Facein now,
We signed off on it now, so Warren and Facein have signed
Okay,
off,
we got Monday.
and he's got the letter.
and then I think we.
You have the letter?
Yeah. mhm.
Right, so maybe you can leave it with
Send
Brian.
it again, yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, you actually have the physical letter.
Well, so I'll give you Faceins and you can sign on there, and then Warren, it was scanned,
Okay.
so, but
Okay.
we'll get it, yeah.
But just as a thought, Brian, once you've the letter signed by the 3 bodies, I mean, one of my suggestions was maybe you as chair of this group, you know, maybe say, okay, I've got this letter. We need some guidance on what to do next, and maybe Colleen particularly, because she might be the most well-informed person.
Ann Cummings.
Ann Cummings, because she's been around the longest, if you like, in the Senate.
Yeah,
I mean, our 2 representatives are both fairly new, and I don't think are particularly influential. I mean, one of them hasn't even sat in there yet, so, yeah. And I just, you know, my previous thought was to try and get hold of the hospital administration, which is who we're sending our letter to. But at the end of the day, I think they're gonna require some bigger hammers to hit before they're gonna do anything, based on what the health clinic board found out from them. They're intransigent because they say our hands are tied. So they're not gonna do anything unless someone tells them to, or tells them the rules are changed.
Mhm.
and the one thing that our representatives could do is reach out to appropriate, chairs are gonna be changing, but to leadership in the House too, to say this is a real important community issue. And maybe convening some kind of. I don't have the bandwidth or really the knowledge, I don't understand healthcare at all. On my own anyway.
I mean, there's a lot of people we could reach out to. We could reach out to the care board.
Yes.
You know, we could reach out, you know, we could reach out to the governor. We could reach out to Ann
Yeah.
Cummings.
I think the real problem is that this is a decision that they all really wanted to make, and this is just the fig leaf that they're using to make the decision. I don't think it's like, oh, we have to do this now. I think it's like, oh, now we can do this. So, you know, I realized long ago when I got fired by a client that he'd already made a decision. He didn't want to hear my excuse or my reasoning or whatever it was. He'd already moved on. These guys have moved on. They've already made decisions. They've already reprogrammed their people. Yeah, it's all done. It's a done deal. And I don't believe there is a reversing of this course. That's my take.
My take as well.
it certainly seems that way, but I think it would be negligent of us to not try to see if we can have an influence.
It's Christmas and we're about 10 days from Christmas, and you're saying it needs to be done by Christmas, and I don't see it happening, Peter. I just don't think there's that. The groundswell of angst is out there, but the groundswell of directed focus isn't. I don't see it happening.
So your read is that that UVM, that the medical center made the decision regardless of.
Oh, yeah.
Care bill.
It was just what they needed to make a decision they wanted to make already. This was a great thing to hide behind for, it was political cover for them to you know, cut this corner and pull in their forces and put their money elsewhere.
And to say to the care board, you squeeze us, we'll squeeze you right back.
Yeah, and it's a little, without getting too colorful, it's what big boys do in the sandbox, right? It's, you know, there's a little bit of BS going on.
Yeah. You know, and I don't know to what extent, that's all happening, you know, they just signed a 2-year lease at the health center before this announcement was made. There's other things that, having been on the hospital board up until this past summer, I can tell you that there's some things that the Green Mountain Care Board did, like there was reimbursements for, COVID money that the hospital got. There's over $1 million something that got included in the revenue, area that inflated the revenue, and this is why now the focus is on the, you know, looking at the revenue, because we get too much revenue, and it's so convoluted. I can't say that I totally understand it, and there are so many aspects to it. We don't have focus. I guess that's what I was getting at with, you know, Sue saying, who can I help?
Yeah.
There's nobody here that has that focus, and it's 10 days before Christmas, you know, all of that stuff. So I don't know where it all stands, what we can do beyond what we've done. It's a difficult situation. You know,
I mean, if the idea is reach out to Ann Cummings, like my wife from the legislative internship, the UVM legislative internship program, I'm sure she knows Ann Cummings. I think Liz can say to Ann Cummings, is there anything we can do? But, you know, beyond, you know, ask, but I don't, you know, I know if you think that would be useful, I'm happy to ask Liz to ask Ann Cummings. But that's hardly, you know, that's an ask, not Governor Scott saying, damn it, open the clinic, or, you know,
That would help.
or else, that would help, that would help. Or else we're gonna ask Brigham and Women's to come up here and open up a rival hospital system. And see, Cassie, how much you like that? Or Mass General, or, you know, or whoever else.
Yeah.
We'll get another.
From what I
hospital.
read, Dartmouth Hitchcock is in the same kind of boat as UVM and trying to figure out all these little far-flung entities that they're controlling. So I would invite them up in a heartbeat, but they got their hands full too.
Good point. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that this is happening in the midst of our healthcare system in Vermont. You know, on the precipice of collapse, basically, you know, it really is.
It's not just Vermont, it's everywhere. I mean, it's such a, I hate to sound defeatist, but, you know, the whole system's broken. And this is just a very, 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 very tiny part of it.
But we have I mean, we have uniquely small population and a uniquely old population.
Yeah.
And a uniquely spread out population.
Yeah.
So
And I mean,
none of
it-
those things are helpful.
Yeah. People in the valley now have to travel to Waterbury. Right, I mean, not to, anyway, I have to travel to Utah for my healthcare. So driving to Waterbury would seem like a really pretty good deal for me. I mean, like, my insurance is in Utah. My wife has recurring cancer and, you know, we can't change our health insurance. And so my health insurance is in Utah. I can't go to I need to, you know, I have to go back to Utah for any sort of any non-medical emergency, I have to pay out of pocket. That's, I mean, our whole healthcare system is just,
It's all screwed up, I
It's
agree,
all screwed
but at the same time, I think it would be silly of us not to at least take the opportunity to bring the politicians into this. And I think approaching Anne, and specifically approaching Anne in the context of how to bring this to governor's attention and see what levers he has to play. Because it appears that either Greenmount Care or the hospital ownership is not gonna make any changes unless someone puts some pressure on them. And whether there is any pressure that can be exerted, I don't know. But if it's gonna happen, it's gonna have to happen quickly. Otherwise, it's a fait accompli. It was already a fait accompli,
already,
but it hasn't been fully implemented yet.
Well, we were CCing everybody on the letter,
Yeah.
and we could follow up.
Yeah,
I
I
mean-
mean, that was my thought, is once the letter goes out, is to, and I was just suggesting of that focus point, I think, rather than dealing with the perpetrators, try and deal with the politician side first.
I mean, I know Ann fairly
Yeah.
well, would be glad to reach out to
That would be
her.
a better reach out.
Just see what her take is on it, and.
Yeah.
But it just strikes me, this is one of the things where we could potentially get the governor's ear. I mean, this is a major impact in this community,
I'm not the guy to reach out to the governor.
but Anne could help us with that.
The governor's relationship with the legislature is not pleasant, but perhaps.
Well, this,
Maybe and better than others.
yeah.
So where are we on the work plan?
Sorry, we sure got off the tangent there.
So,
I mean, I think this is a conversation that isn't a next fiscal year work plan conversation, but it's
Absolutely
something
not.
that we ought to,
It's the next week, we're fine, sure.
yeah. And I will give Ann a call tomorrow.
But I just want to emphasize, I don't think this is a job we should be looking to Josh and
Yeah.
Sam to look after. It's,
Yeah.
it's really something that.
Yeah.
The committee should be looking after.
So one comment I have is I have been an advocate for some involvement in the community recreation visioning process, and I know Phil has requested. and the chair-
Conservation, right?
Nice job.
I stand corrected.
Hoist it on your own.
It's reading what I wrote, but like, yeah.
But I don't, I don't see it as running the thing.
Yeah.
But I think if it's like periodic facilitation, and I think the desire that they have for the planning district is that we have a unique perspective in balancing our recreation economy with our, our natural resources conservation. And that kind of big picture is a helpful perspective to have at those meetings. That's
Yeah.
why I'd advocate for it.
Yeah, and thank you, Brian, and yeah, when Sam, like, looking at the work plan, there's essentially the things that were taken off the plate are none of my things. And they were Sam's things, so Sam's potential involvement in that work, and so it's a conversation with them that I think is worth continuing to explore. And I do think that we have an important perspective, and I mean, we led a collaborative of recreation and trail organizations in the valley, which was the precursor to this. I led that effort for a good number of years, I guess about a decade. Yeah, I mean, our lack of involvement is heard. And it's mostly, and it's come truly because where our energy is elsewhere, not because we don't want to be involved. And I've tried to make that as clear as possible in the conversations before. I mean, this is possible, this work, again, those items to explore being the sort of like question mark, but obviously it's possible. This isn't a big reach. It's a work plan that essentially anticipates that it's the two of us doing the work, which I think is an important consideration. We're not looking at adding another staff member. We're not looking at going down to one staff member. We're not looking at really a huge shakeup here in our operations with this. But again, it's always been important to me that the steering committee is very much a part of the work plan. Obviously, we do the majority of the implementation of this work. But it's really important that when we're, I never want to be in a position where we're 6 months, we're in the middle of the summer or something and we're working on a project and the steering committee members like, what the heck are you doing that for? Right, I mean, it's important that we all collectively agree to this work and are supportive of it through the year. And if there are some ways to shift perspective, I don't see this as a perspective shift year. There have been times where that's absolutely been the case. But we have a lot of things in motion that I think it's worth continuing to see them through.
And I'm not looking for a question, but when you say support, that varies greatly.
Right.
Support the Rural Resource Commission is pretty much
Yeah.
do the work and coordinate it. Support
Yeah.
the 117, there's gonna be an engineer who's gonna be, who's gonna be helping to logistics and meetings.
Right.
And whatnot, but less involved as opposed to the wastewater project, which is very involved.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, great point, Brian. And I didn't do this level of analysis this time around, but what we did last year and did the year before was literally went through and I have a spreadsheet of how many hours is Sam and how many is me, and like getting into that granularity of what does it mean to be involved in these things. Obviously, they're not all the same level, and yeah, I can use support or collaborate or so on and so forth interchangeably, but the reality is that there's different levels of different roles to play with different projects.
Will you be doing that next step shortly in terms of the spreadsheet?
I could, if necessary, but to be honest, I don't think it's necessary.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it would be a lot more effort than in reality is gonna come and interfere with it anyhow.
And I've been doing it for 16 years.
Yeah.
So like kind of yeah, but it was a really great exercise last year for Sam and I to go through from my perspective of like sort of working through and being like, okay, so what does it take? And let's be really cognizant about that amount of time.
So we should probably be moving towards the budget.
Sounds great.
Yes.
Oh, look.
What do you know?
So the next agenda item is the budget. Years passed, so a little bit of context. So in my tenure since 2008, when I started here, a lot of the origins of the planning district grew out of the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission. And they had a staff member there who served essentially the planning district, Lori Emery, from the beginning, from 1985 to 2012, somewhere in there, 11 or 12. And she attended meetings and took minutes. She also, she was the secretary at CVRPC. I can't remember what her title was, but that she was referred to. But she did a lot more than that. And she also played that role, not only with minutes and attending our meetings and incredible institutional knowledge, but Lori also through CVRPC did our books. And so when I was hired in 2008, Lori was the person who did all the administrative work. So everything from running the books to, grants to HR, all of that was essentially a service that CVRPC provided for the planning district. And that continued. Lori retired and subsequently within a year passed away of cancer. But a handful of years later, under a change at CVRPC, there essentially became a request, or we were told that they were no longer going to do that. And it was up to the planning district to run its own financials, so on and so forth. And everything from like our personnel policies were their personnel policies. And so that was a break around 2014 or so. And that's fine, right? Our organization had sort of been under the wing of CVRPC for a long time, and then we are in a position of leading and taking up that responsibility. And Bob was I don't think he was the chair at the very beginning. But soon thereafter, Bob Ackland became the chair of the planning district. And Bob was the person who sort of took over when it comes to the financials. So Bob was in charge, took over the financials, budgeting, so on and so forth, and and that's what he did. And my involvement, I became more involved than I was when CVRPC was involved, and leading, but it was Bob's show. And honestly, I was fine with it because he was doing it and I was doing the planning work, and that seemed to be fine. So fast forward to where we are now. I'm no longer on the planning district, and I've been taking over that role primarily, and which is required as there is transition anytime from one to another. Start understanding the way things were done, and the planning district votes on a budget every year, and 90% of our budget is payroll, staff related costs, and we're funded through our four funders as the income. And the last couple years, when Bob was doing the budgeting, he didn't provide as much detail as many of us would like. And so we were getting the sort of larger summary numbers of things like payroll, which again is the majority of the work. And in this, so since I've been back since the beginning of June or middle of June, July, Chuck, Sam and I have been sort of exploring, okay, so how were things done before? And where are things? And so generally we use QuickBooks Online. We have a bookkeeper. They have Holland Holden. They do they're very minimal involvement. They reconcile not all that often, and sort of process the checks. That the processing side happens here. But the larger role of kind of the CFO role of kind of like where are we financially, and they don't do that. That was something that Bob did. And then managing QuickBooks, they don't do that. That's something Bob did. So we've been sort of bumping our way through figuring those things out. So for this year, to put together a budget for our upcoming fiscal year required understanding what got us here, understanding where our accounts are, and understand where we are to date in this particular year. And in doing that, I learned some things. So I have printed copies too, which I don't even think that font's even easier to read, see than that, but I can zoom in as well. But what you see here are a handful of things. One is the fiscal year 2025 approved budget. So this is what was approved by the steering committee last December 21st, I believe. The year-to-date fiscal year 2025 actuals. So that's through the end of November. Yeah, so there were like some that had a larger font, because I did some because they were really small and I couldn't.
It's just one page, right?
Yeah. And so we have actuals, we have projected totals to the end of the year 2025, and then a fiscal year 2026. So I know it's hard, but try not to look at 2026 yet, because I want to make our way from left to right. What we had been looking at in the last good number of years was payroll, and then a number for payroll. And there are all these subcategories of items that are related to payroll. And
they were not on the prior year.
correct, that detail was not there. And I did a lot of digging and was able to find the detail for payroll. Again, that's 90% of our budget. And you can see there's a couple whole things that don't have any numbers, like HRA contribution, CPR contribution, FICA, and Vermont income tax. That's because they were not budgeted. So those are items that do not have, that were not budgeted for this particular year. And they're all things that require money. So what was voted on was 210,778 as the payroll. And then these are the other items that were in that budget, rent, telephone, supplies, a computer, so on and so forth. And it resulted in 230,848 as the budget for the year. And then, so that's on the expense side. On the revenue side, equal amounts across the three towns in Sugarbush. So it just says towns in Sugarbush, but it's 53,962 times 3 for the three towns, plus the same amount with Sugarbush. And you'll see that that the total revenue is $15,000 less the expense. And there was an identified carryover or balance forward from the previous year, and it was identified that the balance, a portion of that balance forward of $15,000 would be used for that particular year. So the result is that the revenue equals the expense. So that's what was budgeted. We get to year-to-date actuals. So I've used the services. I recently worked with a accounting and business finance team to provide some assistance. What I realized was that a lot of these categories were not necessarily in QuickBooks. Sometimes they're in different structures. So what essentially Bob did things his way, and then that made sense to him, and then he put them into QuickBooks, and things didn't always line up. And so that's been a lot of the work that I've been sifting through in the last couple of months. And I should say, I confirmed with Bob that those missing items. He confirmed that they were not included in his budgeting. So we've gone
That was
through.
just an oversight?
Yes, it was an oversight, as well as website maintenance was also not included. I think that was intention. I think he thought that wasn't necessary, but these were all oversight. FICA was actually 0 in the spreadsheet, and then there was nothing for the HRA. So the amount of the HRA contribution based on the healthcare plan is should have been $10,000. And if you look at the other big one is FICA, which should have been almost $11,000. So the budget was short. If I was to make the budget and put all those numbers in there, it's about $22,000 shy. So then we get to year-to-date actual. So I end up utilizing this firm to help us go through and detangle and make sense of where we were, but really for the goal of getting a budget, not to fix QuickBooks and do that cleanup. But it did require some of that work to get us here. And they've been really instrumental, 10 hours of work in assisting this. So we have a year-to-date actual that they were able to run and was able to remedy some of the challenges with QuickBooks, which ends up with a 183,505. And then there's a end of fiscal year 25 projected totals. And that end of year takes those actuals and looks at the future inflows and outflow. Well, that would be the inflows and outflows, but it looks at the actuals, compares it to the previous year, identifies what's essentially missing and averages, and it comes up with a projected total. And if you look, payroll is, even though the amount missing in the original budget was over $20,000. It's about $12,000 in payroll, light. And then we look at the second half there of what we expect in the year. And I'm happy to go through any of these particular items. I have two other spreadsheets, two other tabs on the spreadsheet. One that is a payroll tab that goes into all that detail, as well as the other detailed items and what fits within each of those categories. So at the end of the total expenses expected in 2025 is $245,852. So essentially $15,000 above what was budgeted. If we follow that through, there's 30,000. Oh, yes, so our revenue is 215,848, our expenses is 245, so there's a $30,004 deficit. We ran a cash balance as of November 30th today, and identified a cash balance of 24,716 with inflows, essentially what's left after year to date of 40,472, and then identified what the so the inflows of 40,472 are the three of our funders. We've reminded them of their last quarterly payment to be paid this month, so that's 40,462. That's three funders, fourth quarter payment, and then the outflows. And at the end of the year, we anticipate a cash ending balance of 2,841. So while $15,000 was identified, was allocated as the carryover, what's needed to get through the end of the year is all of it, which is that 24,716 again, minus 82841. Any questions about that?
Yeah, I do have one on that.
Please.
So that shortfall of 57,486, that's with us collecting 68,000 from each of the contributors.
Are you, where are you looking?
So at the very bottom right column, it's showing.
Right there.
Yeah, I'm not there
Next
yet.
year's budget.
Oh, okay.
Hey, let's wait. Any questions about fiscal year 25 before I get to fiscal year 26?
So I do have one.
Okay,
That's legitimate this time. So that 53,962 that we collected this past year from each of the towns in
Yeah.
Sugar Bush.
Yeah.
How long has it been at that number?
it was the first year.
That, we've been level funding that for quite a number of years.
Until last year.
So we were level funding for I think 7 years, 5 years or 7 years. I'm in Zoom right now, so
Sure,
but it's on my computer and I can pull it up in a moment. But we were at about 47,000, 45,000 for a good number of years.
Yeah,
And level funded, truly level funded, I think for 4 years, but within a couple $1,000 for about 7 years. So last year was the first year of an increase, a more substantial increase, and kind of the first time, almost the first time in my time here.
mhm.
A couple of things, like how are we level funded? Well, because we weren't spending all of our budget.
Mhm.
Why? Because we didn't have 2 full-time staff. Sam is the 5th community planner since 2016.
Mhm.
So we were budgeting for having 2 full-time staff, but then we had a fair amount of turnover.
Mhm.
And with that turnover in the more recent time in 2023 to time period, 2022 to 2023, that was 7 months.
Mhm.
So that's one way to save money, right?
Yeah.
And that's what built up essentially the surplus.
Mhm.
And so we've been working off of the surplus. Essentially, what we've been asking of our partners is not the full amount of funding the Plain District. We've been relying on essentially our reserves or our savings.
Mhm.
So essentially, last year was the first year of playing catch up.
And what was that bump last year? What was the increase?
I also have that on here. I can pull it up, but
I can probably find it, and then if you want to keep going.
So
we can-
Josh, the reason for the question is, I'm thinking in terms of, if the ask, and I know you haven't got there yet, but if the ask 68,000 from each of the towns in
Yeah.
Sugar Bush, that incorporates some of the things you just mentioned, but also some of the things that were missing that should have been collected over time that were not.
correct.
And so the ask probably would have been higher for the past 3 or 4 years if we had known all of this at that time.
Correct.
Yeah, so that's the point I wanted to make with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that there was many of the time, the steering committee, when we've talked about the budget, sort of a philosophical question of should we be kind of filling our coffers a little bit and increasing a little bit over time, or should we be zeroing it out? And there's even conversations of giving money back to the town in periods of time where we didn't need it all.
Mhm.
And so that was kind of the practice. I mean, that's kind of where the brain space was
Mhm.
let's minimize the amount we're at. Let's only ask for what we need. because budgets are tight this year.
Mhm.
I've heard that conversation every year since 2008. The budgets are tight this year. And I'm not saying they aren't, but that we didn't build an on-ramp or an off-ramp. We sort of stayed with that and then kind of hit with this more dramatic increase.
So I think this is the correct spreadsheet, but I think the funder amount for not this year, but the year before
that's
was
correct.
45,317. And then last year around this time, there were two proposals, one in which we would not use carryover, which would be a funder amount of 57,712. And then a secondary approach, which we ended up doing this approach of using $15,000 of carryover to make the funder contribution 53,962.
That's right, yeah, that's what I remember.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And so in 2018, it was 41,988, 2019, 44,067, then 44,067, and 2021, 45,317, and that continued 21, 22, and 23. So there was a fair amount of consistency over time. And then, yeah, so the idea in this last year was to let's utilize some carryovers so that this year's increases, in that year's increase wouldn't be so dramatic. Obviously, it didn't include all of the costs. And so that it's, in some of this year, it's kind of bailing that out or utilizing more of the carryover in order to afford that.
You know, this shouldn't have been a complicated budget, and I understand the amount of work you put into it. I don't understand how these decisions were made. And I think it was just, and I was here last year and it was just, okay, that's the budget that's presented to us. It's always been good. It's always, we've always paid our bills. Let's go with it. But had we looked under the hood,
Right.
It might have been a scary conversation this year.
Yeah, and I'm a detail oriented person, so like I 100% stand behind all of the data here. I've spent a tremendous amount of effort in reading through and making sure I know what's in here. Like I said, I have some other spreadsheets that have more detail. If you're interested in that detail, happy to talk about it. But in the past, I wasn't, and I wasn't because somebody else had it, and and that's fine. And it served us well for a very long time, to be honest. But I think we are at it was identified when Bob shared the budget last year. One of the things I requested from him was to not just what is the budget for the next year, but what is the budget for the next 5 years? Like what's a trajectory? And where does that go? And he ran it out to 2030. And to be honest, this is kind of where that was showing. Like this is in that direction for sure.
Yeah, but I think it was more like 5 years from now and not this year.
Yeah,
Fiscal year 2026 was 63,000, so
Oh.
under.
yeah. So yeah. And again, if we had $20,000 that we had already budgeted for, it wouldn't be as big of a jump in this particular year.
So given the time, we did not have a chance to talk about this beforehand. I did get on the call yesterday with the folks that Josh was working with. It was eye-opening and it was very helpful, and it really seems to be figuring things out. What I'd suggested in an email to Josh today was, let's get the presentation, understand the numbers, let us go back to our boards and kind of have it, and maybe have the executive committee sit down and think through a couple of things, if any, or, anybody wants to weigh in on any questions or thoughts, and then come back in January and finish the budget when we have a better idea of how it's gonna be received.
I don't know that we'll have time. Our intent is we have another budget meeting next Monday. And that was gonna be our last budget meeting. Then we have one more select board meeting before the end of the year. And then we were gonna finalize the budget at that time. So we would want this number a lot sooner than when we would meet again as a group in the third week in January. So I don't know if that's doable for
You guys are
my
efficient.
select board anyway.
3-member select
Wow.
boards, I tell you.
Yeah, so I get involved a little earlier on as the treasurer and trying to find somebody who would do this background work for us, who would establish a long-term basis for our financials that we could really rely on moving forward. And the other backup sheets that you have on there, Josh, certainly do that. So we have the foundation for moving forward, that this won't happen again. And we even have an opportunity, and I don't know that we need to decide that tonight, but to hire on this firm long-term to act as almost a financial VP for us, to keep track of these numbers, to do the budgeting, to do the forecasting, to do all the other financial work. So from my perspective, I feel comfortable with what's on here now. I don't know that much would change between now and our next meeting. So my not recommendation, but my feeling is that, you know, I would totally feel comfortable moving forward, voting on this. It, I guess, depends on how the rest of the folks feel. But I do feel now that we have a good financial basis to start from, and we won't run into this again in the future. So
What does HRA stand for?
Well, there's HSA and HRA.
Health savings account.
Yeah, that's
Is HSA and
Health reimbursement accounts.
Yes.
Which is employer.
correct.
Correct.
Well, so one of the key differences with the HSA is with the individual and HRA is with the employer. HRA, if you don't utilize it all, it doesn't all, if you don't, just because you budget it doesn't mean that's the full amount. That's essentially the ceiling all the way to the deductible. So one of the components with the healthcare,
So an HSA is owned by the employee and the
Correct.
HRA is owned by the employer.
correct.
Right, so why the big jump in 2026? And that's the biggest change in the whole budget.
Yeah, so yeah, if you don't mind, I'll walk through a couple of the 2026 budget items. One, wages, wages from 143 to 147. Is that 292? So that's a 3% wage increase for staff. The next is the health insurance premium. So we are currently with the Blue Cross Blue Shield Gold, which has a essentially $55,000 premium for the two of us, two-person plan and a family plan, and an HRA of essentially $10,500. What we're planning on moving to is an MVP plan. That MVP plan, so Blue Cross Blue Shield for the same plan went up by 25.5%. So we needed to explore a different option. And MVP has a product that essentially the health insurance premium goes down, I think it's 8%. But the HRA, the deductible skyrockets. So the deductible combined, it's 2.5 times what it was in the other one. And that works fine so long as, you know, well, so the combined impact in the plan year is a 10.67% increase versus a 25.5. These numbers calculate, one of the things that's challenging is the timing of our fiscal year versus the calendar year. So this is about calendar year that we're in right now. Sorry, this is about calendar year 2025, and then fiscal year starts in March. So I also had to calculate what I anticipate an increase being next calendar year. So combined, the health insurance goes up by just about 12%.
And I was just gonna add that, so you had mentioned the 3% salary increase. And we had surveyed the towns, Brian, as a executive committee, and most of the towns are in the range of 4.5%. But because we were covering the HRA, we landed on a 3% increase for salaries. So we tried to balance that out from the salary and benefit perspective.
But we also had a conversation, and we had at the steering committee level, is that I don't believe the healthcare benefits are comparable to our town healthcare benefits, especially with that jump in the HRA. Which I know our town has an employee contribution to health insurance, and we don't cover an HSA or an HRA. Um,
We do
so
cover it, and we pay 85% of the benefit,
for families,
yeah.
do you do the HRA?
Yeah, and we cover the HRA as well, yeah,
We do too.
yeah.
So what the plan district has, so years ago, when it came to health insurance, we had kind of a traditional plan with a lower deductible. There was a time when the planning district paid for both, and there was a time where the planning district paid less less of the deductible. And then there was a time that we switched to a high deductible, which is essentially what this plan is, that the planning district didn't pay for, and then I ended up paying like $8,000 out of pocket that year over the previous year, and I shared that with the board and was told, oh, that wasn't what we meant to do. And that's why that planning district has had the gold plan with a full coverage of the HRA the last couple of years. But this is a high deductible plan. I anticipate, right? I mean, health insurance is health insurance, you have no idea. But in a perfect world, we're not utilizing that full deductible. But life is life. Anything else about that before I keep on going down the list? Dental insurance, continuing the same plan, not much, hardly any change at all. Vision insurance, no change. Group life and disability, it was budgeted low last year, but no change. The CPR contribution is essentially a $600 broker fee, and I don't quite understand why there's numbers in there more than $600. I think something got coded wrong in this particular year, but that's a small amount. Retirement, it is 5% of salary that the planning district pays after 1 year of employment.
Yeah.
So Sam was in this year after in April. The FICA, taxes, so on and so forth. So then I want to get down to rent. So rent, we anticipated it being $300 a month. It's been $271 and forever. Town of Waitsfield's raised the rent and has a new lease for this new year. So that's $3,600, which is what we budgeted for last year anyway. Telephone, for a long time, the plan district paid $35 a month towards my cell phone. Because I was doing work on my cell phone. And since I came back from my sabbatical, I have not put my work email on my phone. And I'd like to continue that. That's one of the changes I've made in my life. So I've zeroed that out. Oh, back up to payroll total, employee perks. So employee perks 1277 approved in the budget. When I started the planning district part of working here, one of the benefits was getting a pass to Sugarbush. In that first year, at the very least, if not the second year, it was a comped pass from Sugarbush. And then it stopped being a comped pass from Sugarbush. And then the planning district was paying for a pass for an employee as part of the perks. I've removed that from the budget because I thought it was hard for us to make our budget. Not because I didn't want the pass, but I was just trying to make the budget work. So I did that to ourselves. Anybody here can argue differently, but so I've reduced the ski pass benefit, and I've reduced the cell phone contribution benefit. And I should also state that the MVP plan doesn't include most of, but not all of the providers that my family visits. So I understand we're not doing as much of a raise because we do it, we're giving money in this other place. We are also recognizing compromise as well, and trying to be really cognizant and diligent. And I could get into the details about supplies and computers and all those things, but the main things I wanted to identify was just hosted workshops, which is the Tri-Town Select Board meeting has always been $300 as long as I've been here. I raised it because if we actually have an event, it's going to be probably more than $300. We've tried to include all the printing of like this it's quite expensive to print, so when we're printing things like the annual our data report, the well-being survey, we've been keeping track of those costs and they're all covered by this. The general liability insurance, that is the passive program through VLCT, which includes workers' comp. Bob previously had workers' comp up high with payroll and then other things. I didn't want to break those things out, so I just kept it as one thing. But it was under budgeted last year. Stop blaming him. It was under budget last year. So bookkeeping services, I recognize that we need more help. And we need to do things differently. We pay for QuickBooks. We have, like I said, minimal support and minimal payment to Holland Holden. But I have identified in there I set aside an amount of money for budgeting support and QuickBooks cleanup of $3,000. I anticipate a quote from that particular company that I already worked with by tomorrow of what that amount is. I just put an amount in there. I don't know if it's correct. So that's for fiscal year 25 that we're in. And then for proposed, that goes up to 10,000. They already provided a proposal. They said that what they think is that once we have some initial budget support, QuickBooks cleanup, some training of staff, and sort of clean things up, it's gonna be a lot easier going forward. And they recommend 5 hours of work a month. And that doesn't have to be used just in that month, but 5 hours a month and that's included in the 26 proposed budget number. So that's essentially the ongoing support.
Is that number included in there, Josh?
Yes.
That 550?
Yeah.
Okay,
It is.
in the 10,000,
That is correct.
yeah.
Yep.
And you did put, you and I talked about, I raised a concern you were gonna strike out travel and conference.
Yeah, no, it's back.
Yeah.
I mean, travel and conference, so the reason why in this year, travel and conference workshops, those things are so low, I was gone for 3.5 months. I mean, I don't know if Sam knew that he could go to conferences, he probably wanted to check with me first, I think we haven't talked about this, I'm just saying, like, we just haven't. And since I've been back, I've been really busy and I've been thinking about conferences, so it's been really low this year and then anticipate that coming back going
Well,
forward.
I raised a concern not to zero it out, to make sure that we have professional development
Yeah,
opportunities.
and so professional development and that work is included and it's at the same level as it was in the previous, in the current fiscal year budget. So that's essentially it, as far as those changes and I'm happy to send around the digital version, as well, that has the 2 other tabs that, like I said, go into payroll and the other items. So that's where we ended up. So if the revenue to cover all that fully would be 68,334, which it would be a 26.6% increase over the existing year. It isn't touching what I see as the 2,841 at the end cash ending balance that I anticipate at the end of this year. So it would retain that. I think it's good to have a little bit of money in the bank. And I also think that there's a possibility that we could have some money in the bank at the end of the year if we don't fully utilize all the HRA, the deductible / HRA, but that's to be seen. So this budget does not fill the coffers. It does not put us in a position going forward to have more, a stronger place to come from or to fall back if there are errors. I'd like to think that there aren't errors in here, but
Yeah, I guess, like, I understand where you're coming from. I'm also a little concerned about making a decision without having Sugarbush provide any input. I mean, I guess they were here at 4:30.
Sugarbush haven't seen these numbers so far, right?
I just think they should give you back passes.
We can have that vote, right? Because they don't vote anyway, so we can all vote, but they have to give passes as well.
Now, I must say that I had a philosophical challenge when I was told originally that the job came with a pass, because I had always seen this as equal contributions from the 4 different funders and that they were giving something more that the others were not. providing, and I remember calling Jared Cadwell and being like, hey, they're offering me, like, can I do this? And he was like, if you don't take it, I will, Josh. Like, you better get after that. So, I mean, I honestly think that it being paid across is a more equitable way, but, yeah.
I mean, so, you know, I'm not a budget guy in terms of my responsibilities in the town.
Yeah.
But I mean, big picture, having thought about this, we've seen the work plan. It's a 2-staff work plan. I don't see how we're an effective planning district without both of you, across from me. So, I mean, I could see, okay, it'd be like, take off 90% of the work plan and support Waitsfield. We could do that. But, I don't think that's a long-term recipe for success for the planning district. So maybe easy for me to say because I'm on the planning commission, but I think it's, I guess I'm with Chuck. I'm like, it seems like you've done the numbers and short of a radical revamp of our ambitions as a planning district, or not ambitions, but what we can do. I'm not seeing another path. And I do think Sam's contributions, to be very clear, I think Sam's contributions have been extremely valuable. And are highly, are just really appreciated in the community. And of course, as are Joshua's, but, yeah, I don't know.
Well, as the guy from the town, without a town administrator and a sewer project, I'm not. We're certainly benefiting from the planning district. I acknowledge that, and I agree with you about Sam's work.
And I second what Dad's saying too, as just a planning guy and not having to worry about budgets and not sitting, fortunately not having to do what Chuck does.
We also did agree that we wanted to bring the health equitable more or less with the communities, but we didn't want to, we need, that's gonna take time. And we don't want it to come with a big hit in any year to staff, that it needs to be something that's careful and that doesn't, cause any financial hardship. So that's like a year's project out. We'll have to figure out how to allocate things coming forward. What do you think, Andrew?
So it would be best if Sugarbush was here, but again, they really don't get a vote, so they do, they march to our tune, right?
Till they don't, they always have.
And it was on the agenda.
So Andrew, how do you think this is going to be seen in the select board in Waitsfield?
There's gonna be some long faces and. We're finding, like probably everyone is, that everything costs more this year and last year and the year before. But holding the line, right? Everyone's upset about their property taxes. So we want to offer a budget that is less painful. And it is just really hard to do. Everybody wants a raise. Everybody wants, the dictionaries all have their word of the year. This year it's merit raise. That's the word of the year. So trying to hold the line on the budget is really ludicrous this year. It's just not happening. And I think we're gonna find that at the state level as well. So get ready for it. They'll pull some hocus pocus, but it's still coming out of our asses. Anyway, that being said, I don't see any reason not to vote on the budget tonight. And then bring it back to our groups and see what we get for feedback. And if we have a big kerfuffle, we'll be talking more about it here.
You see the same way, Claude, now. Yeah.
What's
You
that?
see the same way, I mean, take
Yes.
this back to facing as it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, as Andy said, there'll be long faces, but there's so much going on with payroll with us, with road crew and, backfilling the Patty Lewis leaving as town clerk, so we had to have extra people on for that, so. It's the
everywhere.
Yeah,
It's everything everywhere all the time.
yeah.
This shouldn't be a hard sell.
So the problem with
Everything
this
that the,
is that
everything
it's
that the
not a,
planning district does, especially in Facein, like, I mean, with just the reaction to the events in July, to the flooding,
Right,
the immediate reaction and the work that these two guys did for Facein, it shouldn't be, yeah, long faces, but
Yeah,
if
so
if you need
Paul,
a
let
hired
me,
gun to come in there and argue.
Paul, let me tell you the piece you're missing here is that you're appointed.
Yeah.
We're elected. That's where the rubber meets the road. So they're not gonna piss and moan at you at town meeting. Chuck,
yeah.
No, I know.
in
No, I got it. easy.
Crosshair.
I said that. I
Bullseye.
said I don't have to.
So,
Fortunately, I'm not sitting where, I don't have
Yeah.
a seat.
but that's
at the table.
why we make the big money too.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, if you needed, if you need somebody to add your back, and I'm happy to, I mean, whatever.
Thank you, thank you. And probably just to clarify the long faces, it's not gonna be that they would deny this request.
No,
But in
it's
the-
just that
in this
it's
scope of
one
everything
more,
else,
Yeah.
Exactly,
one more quill.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah,
so,
I think what makes it harder is that there were so many years with no bump.
yeah,
It was complacent, and then we had one last year, it's like, oh, okay, well, I hope that's gonna do it for you for a while, but,
yeah,
and, we thought that it might, but it didn't.
But it's also an era of just huge inflation in the last 5 years.
Yeah, and the
And
property taxes and everything.
we don't know when the end of that bump is coming, so
Mhm.
it's just, every year is a surprise, but we should know it's coming, but,
Everything's gonna get better next year.
I can tell you from,
Yeah.
I'm on the teacher's pension retirement system, the GFR appointee. And the actuary's assumption for the growth in healthcare costs is it's gonna stop. Because every year he says it's gonna stop because it has to stop. We can't afford this.
Yeah.
It's unaffordable.
Yeah.
So, we're gonna build an assumption that that healthcare costs are gonna stop rising.
Okay.
And then they come in and they're 7% higher, or 10% higher, or 20% higher.
as long as there's money in your wallet,
Yeah.
they're gonna come for it.
Yeah.
It seems to me as a very pragmatic perspective here, as
Yeah.
you said, that, we've got more than enough work for these two guys. We've got tremendous respect for the work they're doing, individually and for the three towns. 90% of the costs here are supporting these two guys. So if we want the work to be done, this is the budget. I mean, there's not much to discuss.
Well, I will also say that
No fluff.
while I do think I'm gonna hear about the healthcare issue, I don't think that our salaries are extravagant. I mean, I think you guys are worth the salary you're getting.
And you said
deserve a
and you
raise.
said the healthcare isn't even, on a par with town employees, right?
no, I think that
Is?
is, the coverage is on a par, yeah.
The coverage is on par. There's just
Set up differently.
the 100% employer contribution is unusual.
Yeah,
So would the chair hear a motion of, approval for the budget as given?
Yeah, I'm not gonna, if the consensus is to move forward,
Mhm.
I'll take, is there a second for that?
I'll say.
Yeah, no,
Doesn't
please,
matter.
no,
Yeah.
I think you should.
Jack seconded?
Yeah.
Any discussion? All in favor?
I
Unanimous.
thank you, Josh. I know the amount of time that you put into
Well,
this.
not only that, but it's totally uncomfortable, dealing, on the budget, which is all about you two guys.
Yes.
So we understand that discomfort and,
Mhm.
you've done well to set it out for us. Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, thank you for recognizing that. It is uncomfortable, right? It is uncomfortable.
Yeah, I've been,
And
Likes talking about themselves. Well,
Right.
some people like talking about themselves.
I don't, but I don't mind talking. I just
That must mean it's time for the round table now.
But also having,
So we
also
talk about
having.
ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
So we're- yeah, let's-
Never been
let's-
comfortable doing in the
Do we not
past.
have
let's move.
conflict of interest thing to discuss here?
Yes.
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 Can we do that?
If it depends on how people feel. If they want to.
I'm pretty cooked, so I'm
Well, save it for another meeting.
Yeah, I mean,
Let's save it for another meeting.
That's fine.
After the meeting.
I just realized.
Quick,
Wait,
go around?
Oh, save that for another time?
No, save the conflict of interest for the.
Oh,
next time.
yeah, sure.
The only, if everyone has read it and said, great, I mean, we can vote on it, but short of
Yes.
that,
If we have to discuss it, let's.
if we
wait.
have to discuss it.
Yeah, let's do another time.
Okay.
Okay.
Perfect.
That's fine.
Roundtable, I think I've covered we talked about the short-term rentals in the hands of the select board. We have, we've invited Josh to come talk about housing. That's kind of what's.
Yeah.
And, at some point, we're gonna get a report from our consultant, so we can have our public meeting on the looters. End of Warren Planning Commission.
Can I ask a question of the board?
Sure.
As part of my discussion here. So we're to the point now where we sent out RFPs for the bridge design for the permanent bridges in town to replace the temporaries that just get put in. We only had one response, okay, not unusual in today's environment. The response didn't have any dollar quote on it. It's a 3 to 5% of the total construction cost of the bridge once it's built. Now, we're being told that FEMA accepts that. We're trying to follow up on that now to see if in fact it does. But we all know as towns, at least we have never voted on accepting an RFP proposal without a solid dollar amount attached to it. And I don't know if in your work with these
Never heard of
folks
it.
over time, never heard of it, okay.
Who's the company?
Oh God, I'm trying to think of the name now. It's not coming to me. I
If
don't
you
know.
hadn't asked him.
Yeah, so we get a response back from them, said, well, FEMA's good with this, you can check with them, which, like I said, we're doing. But I've never approved anything without a budget number attached to it, so I don't know, I didn't know if any of you had.
No, I hadn't.
No,
Never
never
heard
heard
of
of
that.
that.
Okay,
And it sounds extra squishy if they're just giving you a range of 3 to 5, and you can't even like say.
well, yeah, that was to try to give us an estimate, but we don't even know what the cost of the construction will be, so. That's not even a good estimate.
I mean, there's certainly cost plus contracts, but I don't
Yeah.
see how a town can.
Yeah, it seems like the
You do
pieces
that with a
are.
builder or something.
Yeah.
Have you, the only resource I can think of is the Vermont League of Cities and Towns,
Yeah,
is just consult with them and say, hey, is this,
yeah,
see if they have any experience or guidance.
okay, thank you, I was hoping somebody said, oh yeah, that's what happened to us. Okay,
You might also talk to, I don't know, Berry City or someone who has
Yeah.
recently done a lot of FEMA work.
Yeah.
And say, is that what you're hearing? I mean, is that true?
yeah,
Cause maybe they're like, yep, that's the way it is, and then you'll get your.
yeah, well, and also for us for budgeting, we're gonna need to know if they're gonna ask for some money next year, the year after.
Yeah.
Retainer kind of money and we have nothing to base that on, so.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Peter?
Yeah, my roundtable item we discussed, which was getting next step on the health center. So that's it.
Given the way, we had a meeting end of November, we're going round in circles on trails and trail building and stuff. We've got one member on our commission that likes to sow conflict, and so we're just working through some of that stuff. We tabled our December meeting because of all the time and space requirements of the select board on the budget, so we're not meeting again until January, so.
Oh, I saw that, yeah, because we get invitation to come to the.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
which I will be able to go to that, by the way.
Yeah, and you should, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah. Good,
Good, Eddie?
Well, if you haven't heard,
no,
I am rounding the bend on my final lap.
Um,
And not running for office
What?
at town meeting.
Ah,
And neither is Luke Umel, so we're gonna lose our chair and vice chair. To retirement,
Exhausted.
exhausted,
How many years? have you been-
17.
Oh, wow.
wow,
Not quite what Jared did.
yeah, you don't want to hang around.
Well, yeah, I see, he's old and decrepit now, and I see it coming.
Get out while you can with
Yeah,
your
you
health.
left off last year, it's the continuity is.
So yes, we are concerned about continuity, but Um,
Change is good.
change is important. And so, yeah, that's kind of the news, and I don't know if it's out there yet, but I assume some people know about it.
Any indications of who's interested in running?
We have a few names but nobody's leaping in yet, but we'll see.
Do you nominate from the floor or?
No,
No, you do not.
no, we, Australian ballot on the day. So, nominated has to be, I think, about the 25th of January.
Yeah.
whatever that Monday is.
What's the criteria for nomination? Are you, so many people signing?
You have to get 15 people to sign a petition.
Wow.
Wow.
So 50 people that like you, it's amazing. how warm-
15.
Yeah.
Costs about $150.
Well, it's fascinating. It's the old boys club. is
Inflation.
Gonna be the old girls club.
Back in the day.
Easy now.
17 years
See, that's
ago.
one of the reasons I'm leaving, is I get in trouble for saying things.
Was that a bad thing to say? I've been the composition.
Old girls club?
Wow.
I didn't mean that.
Sorry, never
That-
mind, young.
That's an Andy mistake. Don't follow.
Oh, you're right, corrected.
Well, all I've got is we're only starting budget season in Waitsfield. I'm meeting with the road commissioner tomorrow to figure that out. We are re-advertising our town administrator position, so if you know anybody who might not have town government experience, but just has less good skills, can handle a spreadsheet and good personal skills and good head on their shoulders, send them our way.
All right.
I'm out. I don't do spreadsheets.
And you are gonna pave East Warren Road next summer.
Yes. Yes. From start to finish.
I look forward to it,
Who's taking notes?
right?
That's certainly quite a transition at the moment, which across the town boundary.
Yes.
So with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I'm available.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you.